بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Elders, sisters, brothers, friends, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In these 10 nights, and we all know they are special. Special because of the level of attraction, because of the power they have on us to bring us together. This is a gathering that usually doesn't happen isn't usually as attended as it does happen in this time of year. This is in its own right isn't necessarily a good thing. We should try and be involved as much as possible. But it's undeniable that there is something really special about these nights. That there is some connection very deep in each and every one of us that brings us here. And brings us here with multiple aims. An aim to learn and develop. An aim to gain energy. To kind of build that love, refresh our love for Ahlul Bayt, remind ourselves, and hopefully aims for us to reflect on the previous year and to look forward to the next year. If we don't do the last part, we're not really benefiting as much as we could from this annual program. Part of it as a cycle is to reflect and to really think about ourselves, set ourselves some targets, some objectives that we can deliver. And one of the key objectives for us, we might not realize, I spoke about identity, the importance of identity. What I meant by identity on previous nights is this inner clarity in us, this inner compass in us, that in moments of difficulty, we intuitively make the right decision. I gave the analogy of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, how in that moment when he was under so much pressure, he was fearful for his life, in that environment that was created for him by the beautiful and powerful woman that was the wife of the king. He was fearful for his life. He was attracted, if he was a normal person, he would be attracted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him additional layers that he could resist. But a normal person would be attracted. So he had both fear and desire combined. But something deep inside him made him stop. Made him say, Ma'adallah. And so what we strive is to kind of learn from these examples. And yesterday I spoke about how we can learn methods from the infallibles, not just content. And so when you combine these different aspects, we realize we are actually at a very special moment. Here in this room, just kind of gazing around, it's kind of almost an even split between a community that has migrated to this society, people who have come in from different parts of the world, who have brought in values, including the love for Ahlul Bayt, including the love for Imam Hossein, including many good things, and perhaps some things that are less good that were ingrained in those cultures. And there is another almost 50% here who have been born or practically born in the US. What I mean by practically born is came in very young so that their identities were formed in the US. And this is a challenge that we face in communities like these. But it also is a great opportunity. We're not here by choice. We are here because of the way things work. We just happen to be in that transitional point between a community that has migrated, the last of the migrant community, if you like, in large numbers, and the first of the native community. We are in that transition. And if we get it right, a lot of good can come out of this. Good for us, good for the United States, good for the rest of the world. This is a very important, a very powerful country. There are lots of good things about this country that we can learn from, benefit from, and we can benefit ourselves and our communities. But there are challenges if we don't get this transfer right. And this is why, my sisters, my brothers, thinking about the big picture, about the strategy, about the long-term plan is really important. Important at this time of year, because we come here and we identify problems and we talk about solutions. If at the end of the 10 days we leave these halls and do nothing, we have achieved little. We have achieved something, but we've achieved very little. And the problem with community work, it's plagued by, let me say it differently. One of the words I hate about community work is the word we. This word is a plague in any group activity, in any organization, right? We. People say, we have problems, we should look after our kids, we should do this, we should do that. Do you know what they mean by that? We sit in a group, exactly. We sit in a group and they say, we have problems, we should dedicate some of our time and effort to our children. We really need to invest in this. And the other person says, yes, we should. Do you know what they mean? You mean you should, and they mean, yes, you should. So when I say we, I mean you, okay? And when you say, yes, we should, you mean I should. But I'm going to leave here thinking you're going to do it. And you're going to leave here thinking I'm going to do it. Next year comes, I haven't done anything. Neither have you. So we come back and say, let's think about the big picture, let's devise the strategy, and we should do this, and we should do this, and yes, we should. Right? And this is a cycle that can continue with dangerous consequences, because time is irreversible within our control. We will lose a year every time we do this. We will lose time, we'll lose energy, and we'll lose people. And so, unless the conversation changes from we should to somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to do this little part. This is me. This is something I have the skill set to do. I have the training to do. I have the passion to do. I'm going to do this part. It's a small part. I'm going to do it. It's a big problem. Not a single person can fix. And somebody else says, well, I'll take that piece. Somebody else says, I'm going to take that piece. And somebody says, you know what, I'm going to coordinate between you. I'm going to say, set your objectives and then have some sort of a measurement to compare how have you progressed. And then this is the only way we can move. If we responsibly and individually feel the responsibility for the outcomes. If we say somebody else is going to do it, or if we just keep talking about the needs, but we're busy, and the needs, and we have many other commitments, which we do. We're all busy. The thing is, though, this is an important part of life that we need to understand and figure out. And the sooner we figure it out, the better. My argument is that we are in a special place in that we have this transition. And then we can get it right and we can get it wrong, and it's completely up to us. And we are blessed if we get it right. We'll do ourselves a huge favor, do this society a huge favor, and do many, it's something that's good on every level. We have a message of love, of compassion, of logic, of understanding, of peace that we want to spread to people. Spread it not through propaganda, spread it through action, through doing good things, through behavior. And Ahlul Bayt spoke, Imam Sadiq on multiple occasions, and the other Imams, give descriptions of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. They say you should be able to tell a Shia with these descriptions. And if they don't fit, they're not. And you look at the descriptions, they have components that are to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are a lot of components that are to do with behavior. Being responsible, being accountable, delivering on promises. Things which are kind of fundamental, and we need to kind of internalize them so that when we behave without even trying to communicate that, we become known for being kind of a special breed of people. People that have been influenced by Hussein, inspired by Ahlul Bayt, who are a better caliber of people. That's the whole point of religion, is to bring the best in us and to reinforce that. And so, with this in mind, this kind of identity and what we want to include in it, I wanted to today kind of touch on kind of a few related topics that kind of complement this and bring it together with this in mind. So, what should this identity? I've been talking about the mechanisms that we need a community that can help create an identity. We need to create structures. We need to do things. But what are those values that we want to incorporate into that identity? What is it? What's the outcome we want? And I said the beauty is it's still fluid. It hasn't been formed. It's our chance, our opportunity to pick and choose what we incorporate. Essentially, we can design, to some extent, design what the future of the Shia Muslim American identity looks like. Isn't that amazing? That you can design that? We actually can. We have a lot of flexibility in doing this now. And watch my words, the order is really important. Shia Muslim American identity. So the foundations need to be very clear where we start, and then we can actually shape that. We can bring some culture, delete some culture, change things, create a pot that will, over time, produce great results. And so the first and foremost factor that needs to be incorporated into this identity is the credibility of our sources. That whatever we decide to incorporate has to be credible, has to be reliable. And I talked a little bit about credibility yesterday, how important it is, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invested years of the lives of the Prophet before they became prophets, before they became messengers, before they were sent to people. There were years of investment in gaining that credibility, in building that brand, if you like. That there is this person who stands for these things. The Prophet was known as a Sadiq al-Amin. He stood for values that were so important for him to deliver his message when he delivered his message. And same with the other messengers. There is a period where you have to build that credibility, and that has to come from the reliable sources. And we need to understand that. So our sources, we started with rationality and spoke about it. I'm just trying to kind of show you how all the different topics, they are standalone topics, but you put them together and you get a comprehensive picture, like pieces of a jigsaw, essentially. That rationality and logic is where we start from. And that leads us, by definition, to seeking evidence. We want evidence. We're not just going to follow anything. And that evidence leads us to the credible sources that are, after we accept prophethood and infallibility and imamah, lead us to the Quran and lead us to the school of Ahlul Bayt. And you see that Ahlul Bayt did, and I spoke yesterday about the role of the messengers and the imams in showing us method. Ahlul Bayt didn't just focus on content, they focused on method as well. They delivered in a certain way, in an environment where it was so evident what they were doing, and they focused so much on that credibility of sources. If there was any doubt, they reminded people. Let me give you an example. You know, I spoke yesterday about the Prophet, how if had Al-Imam Ali succeeded him, it would have been a much easier transition for the nation. They would have implemented the values and they would have all saved themselves a lot of pain. They didn't. So Imam Ali had to do a lot of correction, bringing people back to the values of the Prophet, and Ahlul Bayt had to continue. And so at some period of time, and I told you Ahlul Bayt were ahead of the game, and so the counter strategy that Muawiyah developed towards the end of his life, and Yazid followed through with, and the others, is to fabricate hadith. To create hadith that looks very similar to the hadith that was focused on Ahlul Bayt, that led to the sources. The Prophet spent so much time telling us the information and how to get the information, where to get the information from. And so there was this hadith which looked very much like the other hadith. It was hard to tell. It actually reached ridiculous levels. One of the Khalifs in the Abbasid period, years later, he had a passion for pigeons. He just liked pigeons. And the Prophet had spoken about what kind of sports are Islamically relevant, things that you could do. And he spoke about, the Prophet had mentioned 3. As-sibaha wal-rimaya wa rukub al-khayl. Swimming, kind of archery, and riding horses. No pigeons involved. Okay? Now this guy wants pigeons. So somebody came up with a new hadith. He just came and said, Qala Rasul. Obviously he wasn't even told to do this. He just came in and said, Qala Rasulullah as-sibaha wal-rimaya wa rukub al-khayl, and added the pigeons at the end. So this guy said, hang on, this is new. We've never heard of this before, right? This is interesting. So he laughed. When he was asked, what's the source? Did the Prophet say that? He laughed. He said, I added it. He admitted to kind of adding something. What did the Khalifa do? Didn't punish him for lying. He laughed as well and gave him a bit of money. Kind of, thank you for making my pigeons look good, in the words of the Prophet. What this created is a whole confusion. There is so much being fabricated and pushed that wasn't well known to people. And so Ahlul Bayt didn't just have to communicate the message, but had to show in their methods what was special about them. Look to this counter strategy. Al-Imam al-Rida. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Ahlul Bayt were respected as scholars. People knew them. But he wanted to say something else to people, that I'm not just a scholar, I'm not just a great man, there is something more to me. And I'm telling you the story of this famous hadith known as the Golden Chain hadith, which we should all know about. Al-Imam al-Rida was being sent from where he was in Medina all the way to Nisabur, which is where he's buried now approximately, very close to Mashhad. On the way, scholars knew he was coming, so there's this great scholar, they wanted to kind of really learn from him. And they gathered, they stopped him. He was, and see how much detail historians recorded these events. They say he was on a she-camel, on a female camel. There was like a little tent-like structure on it. The Imam was inside, so his face was hidden. The color of the camel was fair, was light, it wasn't dark. You see the details? All of that is really important. And then they gathered around him in their thousands, a few scholars, famous scholars, and thousands of students. Some numbers estimate 20,000. It was a huge number of people. And they said, we want to hear from you. We want you to give us a narration so that we can put in our books that we have. It's like they wanted to say, you are kind of this famous professor. We want to say we have heard something from this professor. So we can quote it. We can say, I have heard from Ali this. So please tell us something so that we can quote you on it. That was the objective. So they asked him and they couldn't see him. He was inside this tent, so the Imam revealed it. When they saw him, some started crying, some started kind of just feeling this emotional this kind of level, overflow of emotions. This is the grandson of the Prophet, this famous scholar, famous guy. Some of them were followers of Ahlul Bayt, others were not. And they saw him. So he said the following, and people documented it. And see, he didn't just tell them the end result. This is the important part. The method, the credibility of the source. He said, my father, Musa ibn Ja'far, said that his father, Ja'far ibn Muhammad, said that his father, Muhammad ibn Ali, said that his father, Ali ibn al-Hussein, said that his father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, said that his cousin, Prophet Muhammad, said that his father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, said that his cousin, Prophet Muhammad, said that he heard Jibreel say that he heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, La ilaha illallah hisni, faman dakhala hisni amina min adhabi. This phrase, the phrase La ilaha illallah, there's no God but Allah, is my fortress, is this defensive wall. Whoever enters my defensive wall is protected from my punishment. Okay. Listen to this. Just kind of picture it in your head. So this man, with so many thousands of people, gives this chain of narrations where every single one of them is a person quoting his father, quoting his father, quoting his father, quoting the Prophet, quoting Jibreel, quoting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then some historians say, so he brought the cover down, the camel walked a little bit, he stopped it, removed it again, looked back and said, وَلَكِنْ بِشَرْطِهَا وَشُرُوطِهَا وَأَنَا مِنْ شُرُوطِهَا. So it's not just about saying the phrase, it's about implementing what it means. And so the Imam told them, it's not just about saying it, it's about saying this phrase with and sticking to what it means, with all implementing all the conditions, بِشَرْطِهَا وَشُرُوطِهَا. But implementing, fulfilling within the limits of all of its conditions, and I am one of its conditions. Essentially, if you just say that phrase and ignore the content, you haven't done much. You need to accept the Imam of Ahlul Bayt, the infallibility of Ahlul Bayt, and when you come to me, I'll take you through this chain. That's my road. I'll take you through my father to his father to his father to his father to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to go through another route that has debatable links, weak links in the chain, that's your problem. You see the emphasis on delivering this content. And so because of, why is this, by the way, all followers of Ahlul Bayt and followers of Ahlul Bayt, all Muslims, report that this is one of the most reported narrations of all time. Partly because of its content and the strength of the chain, and partly because of the way the Imam delivered it. And so these thousands, all of them went home and told their friends, like, you just can't believe what happened today. And they documented it, and they wrote it, and they wrote it, and they wrote it. And so he managed to make this impact, this presence through logic, through style, delivered this impact. It wasn't just about beautiful content. And Ahlul Bayt left us. I told you yesterday how they created this institution of Imams, the chain of Imams, all the way to Al-Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjallahu ta'ala farajah. You know how we say these are the companions of Imam al-Sadiq and we admire them, and these are the companions of Imam al-Baqir and we admire them, and these are the people who lived at the same time as Imam al-Hossein and we admire them? We You and I live in the time of Imam al-Mahdi. We still have an Imam. Let's not forget that. We have the protection, we have the guidance, we have the support, we have our Imam. Nobody is left without one, and we have one. And so we need to understand, develop this connection to the Imam, and then when the Imam isn't directly accessible to us, what do? He left us with a system, left us with a process. And this is the concept of marji'iyyah. This is point number 2. This is really important, my brothers and sisters. We find ourselves in situations where people say, you know what, the Quran is enough, I just don't want the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Quran is fine, the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'll forget the Sunnah. Well, if you forget the Sunnah, how do you know the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then? How do you know it wasn't made up? But fine, I'll forget the Sunnah and I'll try to interpret the Quran. Well, how can you act in your practice when the Quran doesn't give you enough detail? Because it was supposed to be taught. Remember, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. There was a teaching process. It needs to be taught. And then there are others say, well, you know what? I'll just go to the sources of Ahlul Bayt and I will read and I'll use my own judgment. Well, with all due respect, my brother, my sister, you're not qualified. You're not. And so this system has a lot of value beyond the quality of the knowledge we get from our scholars who have dedicated decades of their lives. If you say which scholar, the ones who spend dedicated decades of their lives studying, the ones whose ijtihad, whose level of independence is not questionable, unanimously accepted, the ones whom at least a significant number of people say they are the most knowledgeable. That they are, either the most knowledgeable or at least within the top 2 or 3. This is the category if you can't distinguish the most knowledgeable. But it's that level, that highest level. And this system is a system created by Ahlul Bayt. You hear people saying, marji'iyyah is a concept started a few hundred years ago. And I just told you yesterday the story of how it started. It actually was instituted by the Imams over hundreds of years. And in a previous lecture a few years ago, I actually went through the names of the scholars between Al-Imam al-Mahdi to the current school of Najaf that we have. It's actually not that long. So it's something that was established by Ahlul Bayt. And this global connection is special. It's a huge core strength of us followers of Ahlul Bayt. It's a credible source that where we get the information from, but it's a connection that makes us special. Don't forget, Imam al-Mahdi gave us his guarantee on a condition. Yes? And Imam al-Mahdi gave us his guarantee. He said, فَإِنَّهُمْ حُجَّتِي عَلَيْكُمْ وَأَنَا حُجَّةُ اللَّهِ. He left us with a condition that if we take the information from these credible sources, then he will ensure that he will ensure that there is truth all the time established. There's a guarantee from the Imam that's conditional on this understanding. And so the maraji', it's not just an expert that we can pick and choose. It's a way, it's a system, it's an identity piece in the school of Ahlul Bayt. And so if we feel weak, if we feel challenged, go and seek information. Don't disregard something just because you just don't think you have enough information about it. Just because you face a difficult situation, don't give up. And of course, above everything else I said, is the reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we need to understand these mechanisms, and they're very important. And our scholars, we have a great caliber of scholars throughout history who again followed the path of Ahlul Bayt, who were able to deliver their messages in a very impactful way. It's a type of leadership that we should be very proud of. And there are so many of those examples. Let me tell you a funny story. One of our scholars is by the name of Al-Allama al-Hilli. At the time of Al-Allama al-Hilli, there was this king. He was the king of an empire, the emperor of an empire that covered parts of Azerbaijan, Iran, Iraq, and some other parts of the Middle East. He was a bit of an interesting character. He was somebody who was very powerful, a bit emotional, quite a funny guy in multiple ways. He was known for that. He was famous for that. That he was somebody who was witty, he was quick, and was quite emotional. One day, he decided, in a moment of anger, to divorce his wife. He divorced his wife and said, "Anti taliq, taliq, taliq," 3 times, which was the end of the relationship for him. So he went to the scholars it was a Sunni state at the time. So he went to them and said, "I've done this, I want a solution, I want my wife back, and find me a solution." And at the time he had the usual style. He had representatives of the Maliki school, of the 4 major schools of thought in the Sunni, so Maliki, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali. So he brought them and said, "Look, find me a solution." They said, "We all agree." He said, "You know what, you don't agree on everything. Like on most things you disagree with each other. On this you agree? Like, come on, find me something." They said, "No, there's nothing, we have to say this." By the way, in the school of Ahlul Bayt, marriage is easy and divorce is hard. You need 2 witnesses. In the other schools, marriage is hard, you need witnesses, but divorce is very easy. And so he was just confused. He wanted to get back to his wife, and they told him the only solution is if your wife gets married to somebody else, consummates the marriage, then he divorces her, then you can marry her again. He said, "Well, that's not going to happen. I want a solution." They said, "Very little we can do." One of his ministers said, "There is another school of thought. There's this guy in Hill, in Babylon, ancient Babylon, Hill now in Iraq. His name is Alam al-Hilli. They have another school of thought. He might have something, It's a desperate situation, requires desperate measures." So they sent to Alam al-Hilli. Alam al-Hilli knew he needed to make that impact in a very clever way, in a very witty way, in a very quick way. He just wouldn't be able to have a debate with this guy, right? And he knew he had a solution. So he went. Now the other scholar said, "You know what, this guy belongs to a school called Rawafil. These are they have no clue. This guy is they're not very bright, they're not very intelligent, they don't know what they're doing, Why would you bring somebody like that, like almost a peasant, somebody clueless, you bring him to this, esteemed place?" And Alam al-Hilli heard this was the message being portrayed, so he wanted to kind of reinforce it and use it, just to kind of for impact. He turned up. After much, he said, we'll bring the guy, so he came in. So Alam al-Hilli walks in, takes his shoes, puts them under his arm and walks in. I mean, you're walking into the palace of an emperor, right? You don't walk with your shoes. I mean, everyone knows that, right? And so they looked at him puzzled, like, what do we do with this guy? And so the others wanted to kind of take it as an opportunity, and they said, look, this is the kind of guy that leads the Shia. This is the kind of caliber that leads the Shia. He doesn't even know how to sit. So he was asked, now obviously the attention is all on this guy, why does he have his shoes with him? So they said, "Why did you bring your shoes with you?" He said, "Well, I brought them in because I didn't want to have, I know this is a mixed environment, you have representative scholars from the other schools of thought, Hanabila, Mawalik, Shafi'iyya, Hanafiyya. I didn't want my shoes to be stolen like Abu Hanifa stole the Prophet's shoes." So the Hanafiyya said, "What are you talking about? Abu Hanifa was born 100 years after the Prophet. He never saw the Prophet. How can he steal his shoes?" He said, No, sorry, I meant Ahmed." So the Hanabila said, "Well, Ahmed was born 100 years later, all about 100 to 200 years later. What are you talking about?" He said, No, I meant the other guy, Shafi'i." So he went through the 4 scholars. It's the other guy. They all said that. And now he's looking ridiculous, of course, but everybody's trying to kind of understand what he's talking about. And they said, "Look, he doesn't even know when these people were born." He said, "O king, then, if all these 4 were born 100 years after the Prophet, so what was the sect at the time of the Prophet?" Who was with the Prophet then? If all of them were 100 years later, what was the type of Islam that was at the time of the Prophet? And everybody just couldn't say anything. What do you say to that? He said, well, I'm telling you the fiqh of Ali bin Abi Talib. He was at the time of the Prophet. Everyone knows that. And I'm going to tell you, and so at which point, obviously, it was a mixture of laughter and disaster for the others, really. You know, the king likes this kind of approaches, and it was a very powerful, kind of poignant point delivered in a very powerful way. If all the others were developed later, why do we have to choose from something that was developed 100 years later when we have something that was there at the time of the Prophet? And I'm going to tell you my chain, I'm going to tell you my link, and solve the problem for the king. Told him, even your divorce is not valid. It was in a moment of anger, and you needed witnesses, and you didn't have either of them. But the point is, this is our school of thought. This is somebody who followed Shaykh al-Tusi, the famous Shaykh al-Tusi. And Shaykh al-Tusi, this guy that I'm talking about, Alam al-Hilli, is about 750 years ago. Probably 750 years ago. And he's one of our great scholars. And there are so many other examples of these kind of events where they would follow. You know, this kind of approach, it's different, it's Alam al-Hilli, but this level of intellect and challenge, doesn't it remind you of the style of Ahlul Bayt? Not in the way he walked in, but in the way he delivered the final point. If these people weren't there at the time of the Prophet, then who was? This is something that we read Imam Ali doing, we read the other Imams doing. It's one system, it's one school, and these are the results of it. And we have the fruits of it, my brothers, my sisters. Let's not, in a moment of naivety, give up on that. It would be a shame, real shame. So that's, we know reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, credibility of sources, marji'iyya being really important. And I spoke about the teams, the environment within which we can operate. Spoke a lot about the importance of this beauty of vulnerability in Islam, that we're all dependent on each other. That in a marriage, you're not 100%, you're better in some things, you're worse in some things, together you're better. That you seek somebody who will complete you, that you're interdependent, that if you remove the other person, you're worth less. This interdependence is a characteristic of Islamic values. In the family situation, in marriage, this is one layer of interdependence. And the approach shouldn't be about, these are my values and these are my requirements and this is my expectation, you're not meeting it. Rather, it should be about giving as much as possible, taking as little as possible. And if both people did this, it will be fair as well. You either demand and the other person demands, or you give and the other person gives. Same outcome, but the process is very different. But this is kind of horizontal integration, if you like, in the community. And we have the vertical integration, which is very relevant to our identity building process, which I haven't spoken about before. The integration between parents and children. The integration between generations. The interdependence between generations. We live in an environment that's very segregated. In the Western world, it's about individualism, it's about you, it's not about your parents. It's about being embarrassed of your parents when you're a teenager. It's okay to compete on whose parents are worse, mine or yours. It's an environment where you kind of pick all the flaws you can find, and then you share them, and you distance yourself as much as possible. Because parents are old, right? They're old and embarrassing, and they do strange things. Well, we are not, and we will always be like that. And so this view of the generations comes from the environment we mix with, has a lot of impact on how we perceive ourselves, how we view ourselves with respect to parents. The version that was created by Islam is completely different. When you read, one of the topics that are most covered by the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt is Birr al-Walidain. This is something that's so reinforced that if you cross the Islamic limits when it comes to that relationship with parents, if you don't treat them the way they should be treated, it's one of the major sins. We have a limited number of major sins. This is one of them. A man comes to the Prophet. He tells him, my mother annoys me. She is rude to me. I don't like my mother. I'm complaining about her behavior. The Prophet says to him, did she complain when she was pregnant? Was she rude when she breastfed you? Was she rude when she nurtured you when you were young? He said, no. I mean, I don't know. You know, she did all of that. That's true, but I don't know. But I've done more than enough. I've taken her to Hajj twice, carrying her on my shoulders. He said, you haven't done enough. Go back. Imagine carrying your mother on your shoulders. Those who've been to Hajj, it's tiring. It's tiring doing it on your own. Carrying your mother for two times? On two different occasions? And this message, see, this verse that I started with, all verses deserve attention. This deserves attention in this spot that I'm going to tell you about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared, decided, finalized. أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ, that you do not worship anything, any being except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember that word Imam Rida used, La ilaha illallah hasni? It's again here, it's featuring here. أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. When the Quran is setting priorities, puts this right next to the previous one. Associates the two almost. That you do this and you do this. إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرَ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. This is important. Quran talks about if they grow old, either one of them, one or both of them, don't use the word of. This is like this tat. And Imam Rida says, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew of a word that was shorter than this, he would have used it. This is the simplest form of disapproval. This is this kind of the least rude no you can think of. If there was something smaller in Arabic, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have used it. Oof. This is like saying, okay, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it and say nothing. I'm just going to do it and make my feelings known in the slightest possible way. وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. Now you might say, why is that? Why is the emphasis? It's this interdependence. You see, my brothers, my sisters, in the communities, in the societies we live in, your parents give birth to you, you grow up complaining about them. If you do something right, it's because you're amazing. If you do something bad, it's because your parents didn't provide you with the right toolkit. Right? It's their fault for bringing me here. It's their fault for not doing X, Y, Z. But it's not their fault or their achievement that you're here tonight, for example. That's all down to you because you're amazing. However, when you do something wrong, it's all because of your parents. And so we have this culture where you grow up, people look forward to moving out, dumping their parents, leaving their parents. Parents, actually, because they have gone through the same cycle, they also look forward to you moving out. And people say that. It's an open conversation, right? You know, my kids are 16, can't wait. This is a quotation, actually, of one of my colleagues at work. And so they leave, and then you end up on your own. They end up their own. They end up old in a nursing home, and you end up on your own. Comfortable, young, strong, great. Then you end up in a nursing home. Your kids leave you as well. That's how it works, right? There's a story, I don't know how authentic it is, it's a story, but I think its meaning is important. This story of a man who is being beaten savagely by his son. Savagely. And the man doesn't say anything. He beats him, and the son doesn't say anything. Sorry, the father doesn't say anything. So the son is beating his own father, and the father doesn't say anything. Beats him, then he just can't calm down still. He still wants to beat him a bit more. So he drags him to chuck him outside the house. As he gets near the door, the father says, enough, that's enough. When I used to beat my dad, I never chucked him out of the house. That was the limit. The point is, what he's saying is that what I did before is being done to me now. And it's kind of fair, right? But, it's unfair if you exceed the limit of what I did. And, this is an analogy, but this is what happens. If you ignore your children and your children grow up not having that connection with their parents and leave their parents, why do you expect your children to treat you any better? Why wouldn't you say, if they grow up not really knowing their grandparents, why do you expect them to care about you? I mean, is it logical? And so this happens in a country like China. China, the one-child policy they implemented many years ago. Exactly, that's part of the reason of the story. So they've changed it now to potentially to, it used to be 1 if the firstborn is a boy, or 2 if the firstborn is a girl. You can have another girl basically to have a boy. That was the old policy, and there is talk recently of changing it to 2 children. An important part of the reason is historically it was a great move. It was a cost-saving step. What they did was, instead of having so many people, so many mouths to feed who are not productive to the economy because they're children, you limit the number and you limit the growth and you distribute the resources on a smaller number of people. Great. Now, this strange cost appeared out of nowhere in tens of billions of dollars every year. If you want, read The Economist. Tens of billions of dollars every year. Because those parents didn't have, historically in the Chinese culture, children looked after their own parents at home. Now there aren't enough children, so they put their parents in nursing homes. They can't afford it, so they dump them on the state. So the state has to find nursing homes. Has to build nursing homes, employ people in those nursing homes, but there aren't many youth because the country has been diminishing in terms of population for a while. So they get foreign workers to work in nursing homes to look after old Chinese parents. And it's costing the economy huge sums of money. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is the old Chinese way and the Islamic way. You look after your parents look after you when you're young. You look after them when they're old. And there's an additional gain to this that we often don't think of. If you define your life, your life of credibility and power and influence as being, between 20 and 40, 20 and 50, right? Because before that, you're confused, you're young, you don't know much, you're studying, right? Your meaningful life might be from the age of 20 to the age of 50. You have 30 years of life. And then after that, you're an old person that's embarrassing. If you go to an Islamic model, you're still a valuable member of the community when you're 80. Your meaningful life has increased from 20 to 80. And there's an additional benefit that there is so much wisdom and experience. Parents do make mistakes. Parents are fobs, as you might call them here. You call them freshies in the UK. You would call them, they are kind of, they're not part of this new culture. But there's so much wisdom in there. There's so much value that has developed over centuries. No, I want to make my own mistakes. What do you mean? No, I want to go through life, experience it, make my own mistakes. That doesn't mean you go and Google mistakes and go through the list. What that means is you kind of use previous experience, make the best decisions, and if something you don't have prior experience with, then you take a risk. If you do all the due diligence, you don't stop because you don't know, because you're fearful. You say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead. If it works out well, I've gained something. If it works out badly, I've learned from a mistake that hasn't been committed by somebody else. And we have this wealth in the community. Let's not turn a blind eye to it. There is so much value in this, in the way you can transfer that wisdom, in the way that there are so many beautiful ways that Ahlul Bayt were loved through these different multiple cultures that can be added. There is so much passion. Don't forget, it's those parents, when they came, they set up the foundations. They came up with the money and the time and the effort and the volunteering to give us what we have. They created the environment within which we grew up knowing. وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ. Don't take away from people what they've given. Give them credit where it's due, and somebody in the future will give you credit where it's due. If you claim everything, somebody else after you will come and claim everything. And it's what culture do we want? Imam Zayn al-Abidin, his mother died when he was very young, or maybe when he was born. He was raised by another lady. So not his biological mother, but his kind of effective mother. She nursed him, according to some narrations. Imam Zayn al-Abidin used to, when they sit together for food, he wouldn't eat. And somebody asked him, you should eat with your parents. Isn't that a good thing? You're kind of joining in the meal. He says, no, I'm sitting so that, I'm kind of joining in the meal, but I don't want to extend my hand and pick something that her eye might have reached first. She might have seen something, she's about to go pick it up, and I go pick it up before she does. And she would never mention it. And I'll eat something she actually wanted to eat. So I would rather wait until she eats what she wants to eat, and then I'll eat. In case her eye saw something, how long does it take that time between seeing and picking something up? A fraction of a few seconds. He says, there's a risk there, I don't want to do that. But he would sit with her. And the Imams repeatedly spoke so much about this connection to our parents, looking after our parents, loving our parents, appreciating what they have done. And also, of course, talked about how parents should treat their kids. It's a two-way relationship. Like marriage, you give, you're dependent on the other person, and you forgive, and the other person gives and is dependent on you, and they forgive. And that's the relation between parents and children. It's one of gratitude, understanding, support. And that's why when you see our cultures, at least migrant cultures, my brothers, my sisters, it's beautiful when you see a very old person walk into a hall and everybody's so respectful. They want to listen to them, to their experience, to the stories. They're not ignored, they're not seen as a burden on society, not at all. Because they're not. They've contributed already. If anyone is a burden, it could be me, because I haven't delivered yet. I have a lot of potential, but my output hasn't been realized. They have already delivered. I'm a risk. They're not. And so let's just put things in perspective. And then Ahlul Bayt reinforce this message so much that the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected strongly to parents and children. And if we put in the right evidence and sources, the connection to the baraji', so we have a ruler that we can cross-check ourselves against to make sure we have the right information, that we create families, the right supportive environments, that we come to our communities and take responsibility, not we, I, and that we integrate with the previous generations, I think we have a recipe. I think we have something that's worth a shot. And you see, it's those investments produce rewards. And that's how Ahlul Bayt interacted. You have the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet ﷺ carries Hassan and Hussein on his back when he walks in the streets. The loving parent, and he also wants to send a signal to the community. Know who these guys are. One, the famous narration, one companion says to the Prophet, kind of plays with Hassan and Hussein. They're children, like a little baby riding, and he says, how good is what you're riding on? As in, how good is the Prophet? Your vehicle, how good is your vehicle? And the Prophet laughs and says, yes, and they are very good too. نعم الجمل جملكما, the Prophet responded, وَنِعْمَ الرَّاكِبَانِ هُمَا. They are also special. And Hussein minni wa ana min Hussein, companions grew up, watched the Prophet in the mosque. It became kind of a normal thing. That if the Prophet prostrates, they're all praying jama'ah as a group, so they can't see what's happening in front of them. If the Prophet with his forehead on the ground, if he takes a bit longer than usual, if you prayed after somebody for so long, you know exactly how long they take. And he takes longer, they know it's probably Hassan or Hussein jumped on his back. And he doesn't want to raise his head because one of them would fall. So he would do it slowly, or he would wait for them to jump off. They were very young then. And so the community knew Hassan and Hussein. Hassan and Hussein grew and treated their mother and their grandfather and their father Imam Ali the way we know they did. With the love and respect and obedience. They learned from them as much as possible. And then they passed that to the next generation as well. That's the legacy of Ahlul Bayt. To focus on the positivity, that there's so much of it, rather than on the negativity. To focus on the beauty that there is, rather than on the mistakes that might have happened on the way. And so it's in this, so Ahlul Bayt spoke about this relationship between parents and children, and delivered it, and raised their children to do it. And they implemented it themselves. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah in a battle of Imam Ali. Just to you see the manners, how these people think. The son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, on the battlefield. Muhammad is pushed to fight in the front lines. Hassan and Hussein are at the back, fighting behind with Imam Ali. So one guy, trying to be mischievous, says, Muhammad, why does your dad keep the sons of Fatima at the back safe and sends you to the battlefield to die? Muhammad says, well, they are like his eyes and I'm like his hand. People use their hand to protect their eyes. That's Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, the son of Imam Ali. You see how it's not just about infallibles, it's all of them. It's all of them. There's a system that produces results. And so Hussein, the eye of Imam Ali, the grandson of the Prophet, Husseinu minni wa ana min Hussein, finds himself so many years ago on the day of Ashura on his own. Hussein, on his way, this relationship that I just described between the Prophet and Imam Hussein. And you see how much Imam Hussein loved his grandfather, the Prophet. It wasn't just believing in him, there was much more to it than that. It was practically raised by the Prophet, with the Prophet. And so Ahlul Bayt, when they have a child that's born that resembles the Prophet in some way, when a child is born that resembles the Prophet in some way, in the way they acted or some manner, so children sometimes remind you of somebody. You say, well, when I look at that child, they really remind me of my dad. So those children that resembled the Prophet in some way had a special place in their hearts, because they would just watch them to remember the Prophet. They will just watch them and say, well, I can remember Granddad doing this. I can remember the Prophet doing this. He just had that style. And one of them, the one that was the closest in his looks and style and words to the Prophet, was Ali al-Akbar. So Ali al-Akbar wasn't just a son of Hussein. He was the Prophet's version of the time. He spoke like him, had the same style, the same delivery, the same looks that The Imam al-Hussein says, whenever we wanted, we missed the Prophet, we missed him so much, we looked at Ali al-Akbar. So we can remember the Prophet. So this is Ali al-Akbar, in his mannerisms as well as in his looks. And so Ali al-Akbar on the way to Karbala, when Imam al-Hussein was on the way, Imam al-Hussein dozed off for a second. And then said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Somebody says, why did you do that? Ali al-Akbar next to him also says, Father, why do you say, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un? These are words you would say when something is about to end, something negative is about to happen. And he says, I just had a kind of a brief vision that we are heading and there is a man shouting that these people, the camp of Hussein, drives forward and their deaths drives in their direction. They're walking to their deaths and their deaths are walking towards them. And so I said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ali al-Akbar says, Father, aren't we on the right path? Aren't we on the right path? Then we don't really care if we go to death or death comes to us. What matters is the evidence and the principles we have. So you have a son like this, in his late 20s, who looks like the Prophet, who sounds like the Prophet, who behaves like the Prophet, who's a believer of doing things himself. He's an I man, not a we man. So on the day of Ashura, the companions insisted they would go to battle before Ahlul Bayt. And they did one after the other and they fought. And the Imam and Ahlul Bayt and Ali al-Akbar watched Habib and Zuhair fall to the ground one after the other. When it was the turn of Ahlul Bayt, Ali al-Akbar said, I'll go first. Ali al-Akbar was the very first person from the family of Imam Hossein to go to battle. Ali al-Akbar comes to his father asking for permission, looking like the Prophet. And then his father looks to the sky and prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's now kind of imagining that moment. He's almost saying his goodbye to his own grandfather to go to battle. There's so much symbolism, there's so much emotion, and Ali al-Akbar wants to go fight. Imam al-Hussein says, Oh Lord, be my witness, bear witness that a man, a boy, goes to them fighting and he is the most resembling of your Prophet. اللهم كن أنت الشهيد عليهم فقد برز إليهم غلام أشبه الناس خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا برسولك وكنا إذا اشتقنا إلى رسولك نظرنا إليه. And then Imam al-Hussein hugs Ali al-Akbar. Imam al-Hussein cries so much to say goodbye to Ali al-Akbar. Ali al-Akbar goes to the tent to say goodbye to his mother Layla and goes to battle. Layla is in the tent. Layla can't see what's happening in the battlefield. Her eyes on Imam Hussein, using it as a mirror, looking at the face of Hussein to see how Ali is doing. Ali goes to battle and then suddenly the face of Hussein changes. Layla says, Aba Abdullah, what's happening to my son? Has something bad happened? He says, no, not yet, but he's fighting a very strong man, a very brave man. Go and pray for him. Layla heads back to the tent, looks up to the sky and says, Oh Lord, who returned Yusuf to Yaqub, who's delivered those who's eased the pains of the prophets and the messengers, return Ali to me. And she's praying and crying in that moment. Suddenly she wakes up, she finds Ali al-Akbar next to her. He had come back from the battle victorious. His father sent him to say goodbye to his mother, tells him she was praying for you and I'm fearing for her health. He goes to his mother, goes back to his father again, says, Father, I need water, I'm thirsty. I've been fighting and tired, it's very hot and the sword is heavy. Aba al-atash qatalani. Aba al-atash al-atash al-atash. Is there any water that you have that I can take with me just to gain some strength so I can go back to the battlefield? Hussein says, I don't have any water. Your grandfather in a moment will give you that water. I don't have anything left. And Ali al-Akbar goes to battle. Identifies himself again. He says, my name is Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Ali. We are the family of the Prophet and we will never let you rule us. أنا علي بن الحسين بن علي أنا علي بن الحسين بن علي نحن وبيت الله أولى بالنبي والله لا يحكم فينا ابن الدعي. And Ali goes to battle. A man sees him causing havoc in the opposing army. He says, I'm going to go kill him. And then he takes his spear, heads towards Ali al-Akbar while he's busy fighting. He pierces the back of Ali al-Akbar. Ali al-Akbar falls on his horse, holds the horse. The horse runs towards the direction of the enemy and they keep hitting Ali al-Akbar with their swords. Ali al-Akbar screams, Aba Abdullah, alayka minni salam. Imam Hossein runs, he knows this is the final call from Ali al-Akbar. That's the end of Ali al-Akbar, runs to the battlefield, sits next to Ali al-Akbar. Historians say he threw himself from his horse on Ali al-Akbar. And then Ali al-Akbar in those dying moments says, Father, this is my granddad. Says, this is some water for you. He's just given me some water and says, there's some more for Hussein. He's coming to us soon. And then the Imam hugs Ali al-Akbar and cries. And then Ali al-Akbar dies in the hands of Hussein, in the arms of Hussein. And then Imam al-Hussein says, I cannot carry him. He brings some others from Banu Hashim. He says, carry your brother back to the tent. They take him in pieces, wounded, and they take him back to his mother and to Sayyidah Zainab. And they surround him. They sit next to Ali al-Akbar and they cry. And then you see the family and Hussein all crying next to Ali al-Akbar, having just missed him. And then Al-Imam al-Hussein prepares to go to battle. The battle rages. He loses his family and companions. Al-Imam al-Hussein is on his own at the end. Before he goes to battle, his family tell him, you have another baby who's thirsty here. This is Abdullah Radi'. He would die if he doesn't get any water. This Abdullah Radi' is 6 months old. He would die if he doesn't get any water. His mother couldn't nurse him anymore. Would you get him and get some water? Imam Hussein takes his son to the people and say, if you accuse us of committing anything wrong, what would have a child done? Take this baby and give him some water. They say no and some say yes, and there's confusion in the army. The leader of Yazid's army says to a man by the name of Harmala, says, Harmala, finish this. This is causing too many problems. Put an end to this. Harmala says, who do I aim for, the father or the son? He says, aim for the little baby. And he says, he was so small I didn't know where to hit him. He was covered by a cloth by the Imam. I just don't know where the baby is. Then there was a bit of wind and I saw a glimpse. There was a bit of white. It looked a bit like a piece of the moon. There was this little white space that was the baby's neck. And I aimed for it. I took my arrow and aimed for that spot. And then he says, until now I wasn't heartbroken. But when the arrow hit the baby in the neck, he pulled his arms out and he hugged his father Hussein. That moment broke my heart. Broke the heart of Harmala, the killer of Abdullah al-Radi'. And then Imam al-Hussein takes the baby back. Some are expecting him to come back with some water. They get a baby with a broken neck, having bled, with his father covered in his blood. He gives him back to his mother Rabab. Imagine Zainab and Rabab having just sent a baby and they've just lost a 6-month-old, a baby of Hussein slaughtered. And this is the kind of suffering Ahlul Bayt went through so that we get what we get. This is the price that was paid for us to have the complete and comprehensive religion, my brothers and sisters. This is how much they sacrificed so you and I can get a pure and complete message. Are we going to leave tonight and not do something about it and expect someone else to do that? Or are we going to follow the example of Ali al-Akbar, who said, I'll go first? Brothers, sisters, let us pray at the end that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give us the clarity, the support, the guidance, the courage to think about what we need, to check it against the right sources, and to deliver on it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may grant us the success and support and the reliance on Him, so that every moment we step a step forward, we are doing it on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give us the honor of being with our Imam, like Ali al-Akbar had the pleasure and the honor of being with his Imam, and that we would deliver on that day as we've been waiting and promising all these years. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may grant our wishes, accept our prayers, support all of us, especially those amongst us who have needs, who have demands, who have prayers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tahirin.